Today we'll be talking about under chapter 12, disease and immunity, the effects of alcohol consumption and smoking. That's what we'll be starting off with. So first of all, effects of alcohol. So alcohol, right, the general name for any product that contains ethanol specifically, right, human grade consumption ethanol. It could be wine or beer or spirits or whatever other form it may be in, is a neurodepressant, which basically means that overall what it does, right, is it dulls the central nervous system. The central nervous system, or CNS for short. Right, so even a small amount that is well below the what's defined as the legal limit, I put that in inverted commas, causes an increase in reaction time. Now, what does that mean? Your reaction time, meaning the time that you take to react to something, increases, which basically means you get slower because you're taking longer to react to something. So you're getting slower, which is obviously not a good thing. Right, because it's dulling the senses, so it sort of makes the person feel a relief or release from anxiety. So, people might turn to alcohol because they're under stressed a lot or they're depressed or whatever it may be, right? And because there's a release of stress and anxiety, it gives a sense of well-being. So you start feeling better in the beginning, right? But in the long run,
Like,
because
why do you get that sense of relief from anxiety?
the sense of well-being, because
Hmm.
it's a neurodepressant. So what it does is when you're anxious, your central nervous system is firing certain signals and releasing hormones that is causing you to, be in survival mode and adrenaline, all of that, and it stops that. So when it stops this, you feel calmer than you were. So you feel
But like,
better.
alcohol also messes up our hormones.
It does, right? So this is initially in the beginning, right? It's not as if this is a good thing, right? As I mentioned, right? One thing that even a small amount will do is make you slower, okay? And dulling the nervous system is never a good thing. So what happens is in the long run, right, people start feeling more depressed. Why? The reason for this, the explanation I'm about to give is a bit beyond what the book is mentioning, right? You're feeling stressed. You take alcohol, the stress, because it's dulling the CNS, right? The stress goes away and you start feeling more relaxed. But when the effects wear off, the stress comes back. Now you can see I draw a larger arrow over here. Why? Because you felt relaxed due to the alcohol, when the stress comes back, it feels more, right? And that leads to you feeling depressed. Depressed doesn't mean
And why
feeling
does it and
feeling
why does
depressed.
it feel so
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead with your question.
and why does it feel more after like the effect of alcohol versus
It's like when you take a painkiller. You're feeling pain. You take a painkiller, and it's not that whatever's causing the pain, the injury, or whatever has gone away. It's just that painkillers also affect the pain receptors in your body, right? So what they do is that they bind to the pain receptors, and you can't feel the pain anymore. It's not like the pain has gone away. So, right, what this does is it affects the brain, and you can't feel the stress anymore. When it wears off and you can feel it again, it feels like it's more. It feels worse, right?
okay.
So, right, that so what you take is take more alcohol, right? And when you take more alcohol, the more intense feeling of stress and the more alcohol leads to depression, right? Depression is a medical condition, right? That you're always sluggish, slow, right? You don't have the uh, energy to do anything. Why? Because it is dulling your senses. So when you feel more stressed, when the effects wear off, you take in more alcohol, you consume more alcohol, it's only going to get worse, right?
Okay.
Obviously you're going to have a drop in performance, right? You're also going to have uh, right, a feeling of confidence, which is actually due to lack of inhibition, right? So when you're in your senses, your brain sort of tells you, yeah, okay, fine, that's not something you should do. Because your brain isn't working properly, because you sort of put it to sleep, you people who have consumed alcohol are more daring to do what you would, like, in layman terms, you would call stupid things, right? And they also display more violence and more aggression, again because their brain isn't working properly. What it also does is it causes vasodilation, right? Which means that the blood vessels, especially near the skin, right, they have more blood flowing through them. And what this causes in reality is a loss of heat. What the person feels is warmth. So a person who has consumed alcohol starts feeling warmer, right? But it's actually the vasodilation that is causing loss of heat from the body, and that's obviously again not a good thing. Okay, now how does the body handle alcohol? So
And like
yeah,
people drink alcohol like tend to have red eyes, so why is that? You know?
why do people who've consumed alcohol have red eyes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also because of the vasodilation effect. So it's not just the skin where the vessels become dilated. Alcohol affects your entire body. So it also gives red cheeks, which seem like you're flushed or blushing or something, but just the vasodilation in the cheeks, which is basically what blushing is, but in this case it's because of alcohol. And so that's also what's happening in the eyes. The blood vessels in the eyes dilate, and so there's more blood flowing through them, right? And so they appear red. Okay. Now, how does the body handle alcohol? Well, first of all, right, alcohol is a toxin. It's surprising why, despite having all this information, it's still so widely consumed. Alcohol is a toxin for the body. And like with other toxins, it is detoxified in the liver. Right? So what it is it's oxidized to carbon dioxide and water. And only like this is for 90% of whatever alcohol is consumed. Only 10% of it is excreted in urine. So how does the liver do that? Like how much can it handle, not how, but right, how much can it handle? So the liver can handle 75 milligrams of alcohol per kilogram of body weight per hour. It varies from person to person. This is like a general amount of what liver can handle. 75 milligrams of alcohol per kilogram of body weight per hour. If it is above this limit, it leads to drunkenness, or
Um,
formerly known, just a sec, formerly known as intoxication. Yes.
like, how does your body become addicted to alcohol? Like, after a while, it just stops having its effect, and
the
you feel
body
nothing.
the body develops resistance. In fact, the word for this is tolerance. So what happens is the body over time develops alcohol tolerance, right? So when the same nervous pathways are affected over and over again, right, the nervous system adapts. It's receiving the signal over and over again, right? It's sort of like although they're like physical, obviously in the nervous system, the physical change as well. A person who has to deal with heat, like a cook, right, or a baker, or someone who's working at the flatbread shops, the nanwais. And so, right, their sensation of heat changes over time, and they don't feel it. Excuse me. They don't feel it as much as you would, or as much as they used to. Why? Well, obviously, right, the skin on their hands changes physically. So there are physical changes to your to the neurons in your nervous system. And so whatever amount, right, whatever the previous something, I should let me do that again. So whatever the previous amount was, it doesn't have the same effect, right? And so now to have that effect, you need to increase the amount of alcohol. This is true. Tolerance is true even for like the painkillers we take. If we are constantly taking painkillers for whatever reason, over time our body will develop tolerance, and so that same dose of painkillers will not dull the pain like it used to in the beginning. It is the same for other recreational drugs, right? Like marijuana, or I don't know, whatever else there is, hashish and pot and whatnot. And so over time the body develops resistance and you start taking larger and larger doses. The problem is that even if the previous amount and you've raised the amount to have the same neurological or psychological feeling, right, it is still a toxin, just like with other drugs, right? So it's still a chemical, still a toxin. So what you're doing is you're pumping in more and more of that toxin, and the liver cannot handle it, right? And so that is going to affect your body, and I'm just going to talk about how it does that. Does that answer your question? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So what high doses of alcohol will do is it causes the liver cells to form far too many fat droplets. So high doses of alcohol, right? The liver cells form too many fat droplets. And so you get a condition called fatty liver, which, as the name is, this fat starts accumulating in the liver. And this leads to a condition called cirrhosis. Let me just confirm the spelling here. Okay. So CIRRHOSE, cirrhosis. Sorry, IS. Right? And obviously, what this does is it decreases the function of the liver. So it is not able to deal with poisons properly. And so more of those poisons get into the blood and reach the other parts of your body. Achha. Also, a concentration of alcohol of 500 milligram per 100 centimeter cube or 100 ml of blood, right? 100 centimeter cube of blood is basically 100 ml of blood. So this much concentration is the limit. I mean, in fact, it's the limit where you'll fall unconscious because of alcohol consumption. Unconsciousness, right? And if you go above this, it will result in death. Why? Because the alcohol will uh, affect the breathing. It will stop the breathing center in the brain. Okay. Right. That's all about alcohol. Any questions?
Mm.
Next up is smoking. So, first of all, The problem is that cigarette smoke or tobacco smoke, even if it's not taken in the form of cigarettes,
I think we already did effects of smoking
we're
in
going
the
to talk
last
about
one.
we're going to talk about in more detail how it affects the lungs and the body.
Okay. What is tobacco smoke?
Tobacco is the main substance in that makes a cigarette, right? But when they
Okay.
process it and they make a cigarette, they add a lot of other stuff, right? So it
Okay.
contains, among other things, nicotine, which is what causes the addiction. It contains tar, which is the considered to be the primary carcinogen. Carcinogen is a chemical that can cause cancer, and it contains carbon monoxide, right, which affects the oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cells. So obviously, when I say affect, it means it lowers, it hinders the capacity.
Is nicotine also included in alcohol?
No, alcohol does not have nicotine. So nicotine has its own effect, alcohol has its own effect, but they're both considered drugs. Nicotine is a stimulant, alcohol is a depressant, right? So they
What
sort of work the other
stimulant?
way. What nicotine does is it stimulates the central nervous system, right? So when you take that, you feel more active and you feel better and all of that. When the effects wear off, you feel worse, and so you want it again to feel better. And you can also develop tolerance, and that's why people who smoke, they smoke more and more. Why? Because that same amount is not having the same effect, so you need a larger dose of nicotine to feel the same way you used to. And again, the fact is that all the chemicals, there are about like 7,000 approximately chemicals in cigarette smoke, right? So I mean, mentioning just three of the most harmful ones, there's so many more. All of those toxins are affecting your lungs and entering your body and your blood, and they will have an effect. And the more you smoke, the more you're pumping those toxins into your body.
Okay.
So what happens short term? Short term smoking causes the bronchioles to constrict, so they become narrower. Constriction means they become narrower, and if the tubes that are responsible for supplying air to your lungs and thereby your body, if they become narrow, that means breathing is going to become difficult, right? And the cilia, right, so those hair like projections in the trachea and the bronchi, right, they stop beating, so they stop moving. And so these guys were responsible for removing the mucus. And so what happens, you've got less air plus mucus buildup, and we know mucus is a thick substance, and that means breathing difficulty, right? The smoke also irritates the lining, the epithelial lining, and that causes more mucus production. So not only is the mucus building up, but there's more of it also being produced. So again, breathing difficulties, right? Long term effects, it could be lethal, or it could cause, other problems that are debilitating. So what are the some of the conditions that smoking can lead to? Right? Lung cancer. Again, the primary carcinogen for this is perhaps tar. Right? So a chemical carcinogen is a chemical that causes cancer. What is cancer? Cancer is the uncontrolled cell division and growth. Right? So lung cancer, what happens is that some of the lung cells, they start to divide and grow abnormally. Right? Now you're gonna have cancer in various parts of the body, and basically that's what's happening. So in case of lung cancer, it is the lung cells, right? So I'll just put lung over here. Lung cells that begin to divide and grow abnormally, and what they do is that they form, right, lumps lump of cells, which are called a tumor. Right? They can stay where they are, or they can start spreading. So they can spread to other regions of the body, and that way the cancer spreads in the body. Why? Because the cell is cancerous, which means that it's going to keep on dividing and growing. So if, for example, from the lungs it goes to the liver, right, and it starts growing over there, so it's going to cause a cancer in the liver as well. If it goes into the intestine, it's going to cause, right, uh, cancer in the intestine as well, in the spleen, the gallbladder, the wherever it's going, right? So if it spreads, it gets worse, right? Obviously, when this is happening, uh, right, the lungs cannot perform efficient gas exchange, obviously. Okay. And the more you smoke, the more the chances of lung cancer. Now, not everyone ends up with lung cancer, but there are other things that can happen. Among those other things is a condition called chronic obstructive pulmonary means lungs disease, or COPD, right? And this is actually a term used for a number of different diseases. It includes, uh, you know, chronic bronchitis, which we'll talk about. It includes emphysema. In fact, I wrote that wrong. Emphysema. It includes chronic obstructive airway disease. Chronic obstructive airway disease.
What does chronic means?
It means, so by dictionary definition, it's persisting for a long time or constantly. Right? So acute is something that happens for a short time or all of a sudden. You might come across that term as well. acute. Chronic is something that is lasting for a long time, right? So you have these conditions developing over a long time, and then they're going to stick around for a long time as long as you're alive. So not pleasant. So someone who is suffering from COPD,
It's like a
hmm?
like AIDS also chronic disease.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
AIDS is also a chronic disease, right?
AIDS is a chronic disease. Hmm. I mean, it could. I mean, it again. AIDS itself is not a disease, but it's a syndrome. It's a condition which in which the body suffers from various other diseases, and depending on the condition, some of those diseases can so the condition can become chronic.
Okay.
Right. So, what goes on with COPD? There's obviously difficulty in breathing. Why? Because the airways become narrow. So, narrowing of airways, right? The bronchi and bronchioles, and that's obviously going to cause difficulty breathing, right? Uh, there's also going to be breathlessness, which means normally you're always feeling like you're out of breath, apart from the difficulty breathing, right? And breathlessness, especially when you do anything that involves physical activity. So when active, right, during activity, frequent chest infections, and a persistent cough with phlegm, right, which is thick, sticky mucus. So that's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Then you have emphysema, right? And this is the breakdown of the alveolar wall. So we know that the alveoli walls are important for gas exchange, right? And between the alveoli, you have like small sacs of air that give you a very large surface area for gas exchange. So if the walls between the alveoli and the blood vessels they break, you're losing that surface area for gas exchange, meaning that gas exchange is not going to occur efficiently. It's going to be low and slow, right? And then that means that the person is always lacking oxygen, which means that they will always feel breathless, and they cannot at all engage even in the slightest, like even climbing stairs or walking. It becomes a big challenge because as soon as the body requires even the slightest bit more of oxygen, right, it's going to start to feel suffocating. Breakdown of alveolar walls, right, which affects gas exchange. So how does this happen, right? Initially, uh, right, the chemicals in tobacco, right, they weaken the alveoli, right? And other irritants in the smoke cause a smoker's cough, And due to constant coughing, right, the pressure on the alveoli causes the walls to break. And so that obviously, right, decreases the absorbing surface of like for gas exchange. So your blood is not getting oxygenated properly and you feel breathless and exhausted. Then you have chronic bronchitis, right? So the diseases that were mentioned in the COPD. Right, and again, because the cilia in the air passages they stop beating, and there's excess mucus production and collection, right, it leads to the inflammation of the bronchi, and that is known as bronchitis. So cilia stop beating plus excess mucus production, right, so the passages become blocked, plus inflamed, so swell up, there's swelling of the bronchi, and that is called bronchitis. If you hear a name of a condition with the itis part, right, it means it's some sort of swelling. Okay, so a person who's suffering from bronchitis obviously, right, is having breathing difficulties and all that. Another thing that smoking will cause is coronary heart disease. So we did this when we were talking about, the heart and everything, but it can also be
Mhm.
caused by smoking. Why? Because the chemicals in the smoke, when they enter into the blood, right, they can cause, the blood to uh, clot, right? So
Isn't
normally,
mumps
hmm,
isn't mumps the same as chronic bronchitis?
isn't what the same as what?
Mumps.
Mumps.
Yeah.
Mumps the same as chronic bronchitis? It shouldn't be. Just let me check. So mumps is a swelling of the salivary glands causing your cheeks to sort of, appear puffy, and having a swollen jaw. It also includes fever and headache. So, and it's a viral disease, whereas chronic bronchitis is due to cigarette smoking and the toxins in that smoke, and it affects the lungs. So they are not at all the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. So the nicotine, what happens, like we've talked about what coronary heart disease is, right? It's like the buildup of fat in the coronary arteries, and then later on, right, if the blood moving through them, it rubs it rubs against the rough edges of the fat deposits, and it clots and it blocks and everything. So we talked about that. Now, how is it related to smoking. So the nicotine and the carbon monoxide in cigarette smoke or tobacco smoke, right? It can cause an increase in the tendency of the blood, so the blood would clot, more frequently. In fact, not can but do. So they increase tendency of blood to clot, and so blood can clot on its own, and that blood clot will end up blocking the coronary arteries if it goes there, right? And so that you're going to end up with coronary heart disease. Also, the carbon monoxide also increases. So carbon monoxide, that's the chemical formula, increases the rate at which fatty materials are deposited in the arteries. Obviously, that's not helping. What else can happen? Just to go over that quickly, right? And wrap this, huh?
But like many people who do smoking and like they don't get any disease or anything like this.
They do, right? It's just that you won't see a smoker who's running or being very physically active generally, right? So they sort of adjust their life due to their condition, uh, right? Their lungs become weak, breathing becomes difficult over time. And I mean, it has many other. So we just think, oh, this guy hasn't gotten lung cancer, and so if he didn't get lung cancer, then everything's fine. Smoking, no, that's not how it works, right? There are many other things that smoking, like many other conditions and many other problems that smoking causes in the body. In fact, I just put that up on screen, the text, and it mentions a few of them. Just let me zoom in. And so other risks, right? About 95% of patients with the disease of leg arteries are smokers, and this is this condition is the most frequent cause of leg amputation. So if a person has a problem in the leg, and if they end up needing to have an amputation, they're like, it affected my leg, it's not because of smoking. No, it was most likely because of smoking. Why? Because we just talked about, right, the arteries getting blocked. So if it happens in the heart, it's coronary heart disease. If it happens somewhere else, if the artery gets blocked, obviously it's going to affect that part of the body. If it goes to the brain, you can have a stroke, and strokes are more frequent in smokers than non-smokers, right? You can end up with cancers of the bladder, ulcers in the stomach, so you're going to have stomach problem, digestive problems. You're going to have problems with your duodenum, which is the large intestine. You're going to have tooth decay and gum disease, right? Tuberculosis, which is another breathing problem, right? I mean, respiratory problem, right? So a lot of other things can happen, that is because of all the toxins you're taking uh, in the cigarette smoke. Babies born to women who smoke during pregnancy are smaller than average, probably because of a result of reduced oxygen supply, because the mother's blood has carbon monoxide. So it is, right, the oxygen in the mother's blood is low, and so there's lesser oxygen being delivered to the baby, and so it's going to affect the baby's development. Smokers, there is twice the frequency of miscarriages, a 50% higher stillbirth rate, and 26% higher death rate of babies for smoking, mothers. Then they mention a recent estimate is that 1 in every 3 smokers will die as a result of their smoking habits. And those who do not, and that's what we promote, like, oh, nothing happens. Those who don't die at an early age will probably have some condition that's going to really affect them later on, right? People probably think, oh, you lose your teeth when you grow old. That's normal. You have all the diseases when you grow old. To some extent, that's true. But, the way you've lived your life and what you've done to your body when you were younger does have an effect. It shows up when you get older. Finally, passive smoking. It is not only the smokers themselves, right? So, non smokers in the same room, right? They are inhaling the smoke from the cigarette as well, even, right? So, it's not as potent, it is not as concentrated, it's not as bad, but it is bad nonetheless, right? And so, one study has shown that children whose parents both smoke breathe in as much nicotine as if they themselves were smoking 80 cigarettes a year, right? And statistical studies also suggest that the non smoking wives of smokers have an increased chance of lung cancer. So, even basically meaning that we're talking about non smoking because why? Why? Because women perhaps are less likely to smoke as compared to men, but they do smoke. So, let's put it this way that, uh, right, even if one of the two in the family, like the adults or the couple smoke, it's going to affect the other non like person who's a non-smoker, right? So there really isn't any benefits of smoking that we can talk about. All right, tomorrow we're going to talk about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, viral diseases, well, antibiotics and viral diseases. Then we're going to talk about the immune system. Along with that, there's vaccination and preventing the spread of transmissible disease through vaccination, right? Not really a very intense topic. And passive immunity, also simple. Effects of HIV on the immune system, so we've sort of already talked about that. That's also a brief. So hopefully maybe we can complete the chapter by tomorrow.
Like people who don't smoke can get all these diseases through passive smoking
Hmm.
as well.
They perhaps not as bad and not as intense, but they can,
Okay.
right? Because they're not taking in all the chemicals that cigarette smoke has, but they are getting many of them.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
No.
Okay, then I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah.